What's going on, everybody? It is Monday. Monday is Q&A in reverse day. It's where I ask the question to all of you and you share your thoughts. Now, what I don't do is I don't consider myself a hobby news channel, but there are certain news events that take place that I think we all need to at least think about. How does this affect us? How does this news in the hobby? And for me personally, a lot of the news that kind of makes me think, okay, how is this going to affect, what fork in the road might I come across as a result of this hobby news? Usually revolves around things like grading. But when there is a sale of a massive card, and whether you think it's a massive card or you don't think it's a massive card, that's a different thing. But this is a card that is, it sold for more than any card has ever sold, $12.9 million. When I was at the National and I saw the card in the flesh, if it had flesh, I saw it. What I was not thinking of is, well, look at that. That's a $13 million card. That's not what I was thinking. I was thinking, I bet there are a bunch of people who are really excited to see that card. It didn't really get my juices flowing. But again, that's the beauty of collecting, is some people see a card like that and are absolutely just blown away. They're absolutely excited. Whereas there were a lot of cards in the room at the National that got me more excited than that one. But nonetheless, a small group put together by, well, you all have heard the story. I don't need to recap it. It was a massive sale. It was $12.9 million, and it hit the news. And that is a big piece of this. When there is an all-time record sale for any card ever, and it's on ESPN and it's on CNN and, MSN and all these different places. When you see news like this in the mainstream media, it's something that you have to pay attention to. And I think take a step back and go, is this going to affect me and how I collect? Is this going to affect the hobby as a whole? Or is this just something that happened that's in the news? Well, I asked that to you last week. Is this a good thing for the hobby, or is this a bad thing for the hobby? I had a lot of people respond to this one. More people responded to this week's question to all of you than normal. And a lot of people responded with, yes, it's good. I had several people respond with, this is not good, this is actually bad. And then I had several people respond with somewhere in between, or a we don't really know yet. And I want to take a look at your responses, because ultimately whether it's good or bad is going to be dictated by the hobby community. By the hobby community and people potentially outside the hobby community thinking about entering the hobby community. They're the ones that are going to end up making the decision for us based on any sort of decision making as a result of a sale like this. So let's take a look at your responses. I did a video. So on last Wednesday, I did my normal Wednesday Q&A video, and one of the questions was about this, and I shared my thoughts at length there, saying it seems like this would be a good thing, right? I mean, more news. But then after hearing some of your responses, as always, your guys' responses are always fantastic, and they got me kind of thinking a little bit, going, is this where I still stand? So let's look at the first batch of responses, the most popular response right here, and I'll kind of revisit my thoughts on the whole topic and some of the things that you all had to say. Let's take a look right there. Quite a few people said that the $12.9 million sale is a good thing for the hobby. This first comment says, well, I wish card prices would go down so that I could afford some of the more iconic cards out there. I think the sale of the dual logo man for such a high price is a good thing for the hobby in general. This next one says, good discussion on the most iconic card. The big Kobe and Jordan sale is mostly good for the hobby in my opinion. More attention, publicity, and spotlight on the hobby is mostly good for most who participate in the hobby, even for those so-called true collectors, as it probably increases the demand of most cards in their collection. The biggest con of the sale is that it makes cards more pricey for collectors, especially at the high end. Just my opinion. This next one says, okay, aside from my question for next week on the Kobe Jordan sale. My thoughts. I think it's good for the hobby. I've been watching what Kevin O'Leary buys within the watch market, which are piece unique one-of-ones from well-known and up-and-coming watch boutiques. He doesn't buy vintage Rolexes. He gets the stuff that has a high ceiling. The Kobe Jordan is within his scope of true one-of-one collecting, and I respect it. He's taken a risk, and it'll bring eyes to the hobby. I'm sure he's been told that vintage sports cards would be a safer investment versus that Jordan Kobe, but he's sticking to his guns and buying what he likes. He and two others also paid for the card and not the grade, which I hope new folks coming into the hobby will mimic. This comment adds, a $13 million card is awesome for the hobby, builds excitement, and the news will bring in even more collectors and investors, which should boost sales at most price levels. And this one says, I'm sure others may have much more cerebral, well thought out responses to this question, but I cannot see how the sale of the Bryant Jordan card is bad for the hobby. This is a really out there sale of a card that most of us would not be in the market for at a 1/100th of the price. I would be interested at it for a 1/10,000th of the price. Actually, not for a 1/100,000th equals $130. Did the Wagner or Mantle card selling for well over $1 million change the hobby? Perhaps incrementally, because the cost of lower grades of those cards went up too. But realistically, that affected very few of us. Sorry for the bigger budget buyers. That did affect them. And finally, this one says, to answer your question for next week, I believe it is great for the hobby because it only brings more eyes on the hobby. Yes, the high end of the hobby is getting out of control, but by highlighting these iconic sales, there will be more people who notice and hear about what is going on with the hobby. By showcasing this sale, it shows the strength and the continued health of the hobby. If we heard that the hobby was declining and in a bad slump, more people would turn away from collecting. So anything positive about the hobby is good news for the hobby's future. All right. So a lot of people said, yeah, this is good. Any type of attention, any type of news and media and public relations and media attention on the hobby is a good thing because what it does is it potentially expands awareness. That extra awareness gets potentially more people involved. And it does make sense that this would be a good thing for the hobby because it could bring more people in. And if you are looking at cards where any card that has already been produced, so let's just say 2024 and prior, so the late 1800s to 2024, the number of cards out there is now set. There is a set supply of those cards. So the thing that could affect the price is if there is an increase in demand or a decrease in demand. Right? So if the supply of 1958 Topps cards is set, the only way to get the price to go up is if there is an increase in demand for them or the value of the dollar goes down, which is a whole different economic conversation. So if if all of a sudden there's all this media attention for sports cards, and there is a well-known investor, right? Kevin O'Leary, a well-known investor, a well-known billionaire, who says, yeah, I think this is a legitimate hobby. I think not hobby, investment. I think this is a legitimate investment and not just a hobby. Then it could get other people to do the same. It could, even if it only gets a few people, even if Kevin O'Leary goes on, MSNBC or CNBC or Fox News or CNN or whatever, and a few people go, I think he might be right. I'm going to go buy a few cards. The trickle down effect of some of the high end cards getting more expensive pulls everything up a little bit. Now, again, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Now, if you have a big collection, it has the potential to be a good thing because more demand means higher prices because the supply is fixed. That makes total sense. And I understand why a lot of us would think that that's a good thing. And that was sort of my sentiment, on Wednesday when I went into detail about what I thought the result of the whole thing would be is probably a good thing. Now, I do think that expanding the hobby, expanding the awareness of the hobby by broadening the number of people involved creates a healthier foundation. Anytime that there are a lot of people that are involved in anything, a fan base, you look at certain teams, even if the team is bad, they still tend to sell out the stadium. Why do they still sell out the stadium even when the team is bad? Because the fan base is so broad, there's still a strong support, even if half of the fans are not interested in how the team is doing. The breadth of the fan base still is enough to continue to support the attendance at the games. But if you have a bit of a thinner fan base, maybe it's a smaller market, a team that doesn't have a long history, then when the team is struggling, the stadiums are empty. And a big part of the reason why the stadiums are empty is because there's not as broad of a fan base. So the broader fan base creates stability for the prices and stability for the availability of seats or unavailability of seats. It's the same thing with cards. If we only have, say, 100,000, just throwing out a number, 100,000 people in the hobby. I know there's way more than that. And something happens. Now we only have 50,000 people in the hobby. Prices, because are very demand dependent, are going to go way down when half of the people leave. But if you have a broader base of collectors, if you have 2 million collectors and, a million of them leave, or 50,000 of them leave, or some sort of ripple effect in the economy happens, the stability is not quite there. It is more there when there is a broader fan base or a broader collector base. So we want, for stability in this hobby space, we want a lot of people involved. Now, there are negatives, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. And some of people started to kind of allude to some of the potential negatives. And it's like, if in the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, there were just a handful of golden tickets, right? There were just a handful of them. But what happened was there were certain people spending a lot of money, right? Veruca's dad was spending a ton of money on chocolate bars, had a whole factory of people ripping bars open because they wanted the golden ticket. And so if a golden ticket, in this case, this dual logoman, dual autograph card, goes to a level that is a literal life-changing level, does that maybe mean that what's to come is that they're going to try to do more of this type of thing? Now, I realize that Kobe and Jordan are not going to have any more dual logoman, dual auto cards. I get that. But they see that a $12.9 million card comes out. The manufacturers are likely going to want to have more of these massive golden ticket cards, because then it allows them to have a higher price for the entry point, which is the wax product. There are some negatives here. There absolutely are some negatives here. And that is another response. It wasn't nearly as frequent. By far the most popular response from all of you, the overwhelming majority said this is a good thing. But there were people who said, no, I actually think this is a bad thing. So let's hear from a couple of those here. A few people said, actually, this big sale is bad for the hobby's future. This first one says, bad for the hobby, as it wasn't a collector per se. It is mainly for investment and advertising purposes, and not by someone who is going to enjoy it. And this next one says, I can't believe I forgot about it, but I'm just realizing that another very iconic card is the Nolan Ryan rookie. Maybe it's lost its appeal today, but when we were kids, it was just as big or bigger than the Jordan and Griffey. I do think the big sale is bad for the hobby. It's good for gambling, but not for hobbyists. I'm totally turned off by this type of hype. These are some good points. These are some absolutely fair points. You know, a lot of people have expressed concern about the gambling aspect of the modern hobby. And it is something that does concern me as well. I don't want the hobby to be people who are buying into breaks because they don't live near a casino and can't pull a slot machine. And so instead, they can go onto a platform, and instead of pulling a slot machine, they can buy into a break, which now has a $12.9 million potential winner ticket. Like that, those some of those people might be collectors, but a lot of those people likely aren't collectors. What they're doing is they're just gambling, and the medium in which they're gambling are cards instead of, betting a certain amount of money on a parlay for football season that started this weekend. That is definitely a potential issue. I ran over to a mini mart. So this weekend I was doing a bunch of yard work. I was out mowing the lawn. It's been like 100 degrees every day for like 3 weeks out here in Sacramento. And I got done. I go, man, I want a Gatorade. So I ran up to the local mini mart, got myself a massive cup with ice and fountain Gatorade. And I go up to the counter and the guy goes, no Powerball tickets? And I'm like, huh? He goes, oh yeah, all day I've had tons of people coming in buying Powerball tickets because the Powerball is like $1 billion or something. I don't even know what it was. I don't follow that really. But he was saying tons and tons of people have been in all day buying Powerball tickets because it was like this enormous Powerball jackpot. Well, what just happened with cards when there's a $12.9 million sale is now the ceiling for the potential winning ticket, if you will, is higher than it's ever been. See, before a lot of the record sales were like Honus Wagner cards and Mickey Mantle 52 Topps in high grade and stuff like that. But now if modern cards, which are being pulled from packs, and I know this isn't like a yesterday card, obviously it's got Kobe's autograph on it, but it's fairly modern. if the modern-ish cards now have a $12.9 million ceiling of what could be pulled in wax, then there are going to be more people participating in the gambling aspect of it. Just like there were more tickets sold for Powerball this last weekend than normal because the potential jackpot was higher. So what just happened with this record sale is the record jackpot is higher than now it's ever been. And that's likely to encourage more people to want to participate in high-end breaks because they say, I could hit a massive high-end card that could be worth up to 12.9 million. That's what some people hear when they see this news. When they see Kevin O'Leary, who is a recognizable person, who is a wealthy person, who is a person who invests in high-end technology companies and startups and all these different, and the stock market and all these different areas, saying, I think this is worth 12.9 million. I think this is a legitimate investment. What that does is it could spread the word to people of these lottery tickets of a break spot have a higher payoff than ever before. You know, when you're walking through the casino, because most of us have walked through a casino, and you look over and you see like the jackpot thing and the numbers just spinning. It's just going higher and higher and higher by the second. And it gets really high and you go, man, one spin and I can hit that number? The reason that they have that number up there and it gets higher and higher and higher is to appeal to those of us peasants who are looking to have our financial freedom resolved. And so that, to me, definitely changes the game of if you're playing a slot machine and the most you could win is $100, there will be some interest. But if you're playing a slot machine and the potential win is 12.9 million, that might get more people's attention to participate in that. I love cards, and I love the card hobby. And I want the hobby to be healthy. But, you know, these are some pretty good points that what this might do is draw in more attention for some potential big hit break spots. This is probably really good news for breakers. This is probably really good news for high-end, you know, flawless and, you know, immaculate, and I don't even know them all, but the high-end product breakers, this was probably the best thing that could happen to them because it might bring in more people to be a participant in a break because cards could go for as much as 12.9 million. I don't know if that affects the hobby as much as that affects the gambling aspect that some parts of the hobby are involved in. And I'm not sitting here hating on breaking. I'm not a breaker. I'm not a participant in breaking. I'm not a big gambler. Occasionally I'll go up to Lake Tahoe and spend $100 or something as entertainment. But I'm not hating on those things. The part that concerns me, though, is when young kids, are able to be involved in some of these breaks where they see a $12.9 million potential winning ticket and they're developing habits. And I know that, you know, they'd have to have a credit card and then they have to be of a certain age for some of those things. So then it's on the parents. Totally get all that. But that to me is some of the potential negative as a result. So I do think that some good could certainly have come in the form of attention for the hobby. But I also think that it might bring some attention to parts of the hobby that aren't necessary. And again, I'm not hating on breaking. I'm not hating on breaking. I know a lot of people do hate on breaking. Breaking is a form of entertainment for some people. Breaking is a certain form of gambling for some people. And I'm not here to say what they should or shouldn't do to spend money for their how they spend their money or how they get their entertainment. That's not my place to make any sort of value judgment. But I don't want the hobby to be thought of as just a form of gambling. I want people to also think of the hobby as a hobby. So that's part of the reason why some breakers, I think, aren't bad for the hobby, and some breakers have the potential to be very harmful for the hobby. And there's not a form of accountability at the moment for breaking. I wish there was some sort of association or something. There's not. But there are some concerns I have as a result of this big sale. And this is certainly part of it. Some other people said it's not as simple as it's good or it's bad. There's more to it than that. So let's take a look at some of those. Some people said, well, it's complicated. This first one says, question of the week. Because the card is so unique and was virtually unknown before the record sale, I don't think this sale has any effect on the rest of us. My buddy Carl says, I think the crazy amount spent on that card is neither good or bad for the hobby because it's an outlier. That has no relevance to the massive, vast majority of collectors. Do I think it's crazy? Yes, of course. But good or bad certainly doesn't affect me. My pal Don says, Greg, this was very interesting to see what collectors thought of iconic cards. It's very difficult to just pick one choice. Next week's question, it's an unknown at this point, but I look at it as this two-edged sword. Positive is bringing more attention to the hobby overall. It's like free advertising, so that is good, and I don't think it will affect the average collector. These big investors are just a bigger dog than some of the investors already in the hobby, except these guys are not flippers. They are high-end, long-term buying group. The bad side would be if they start buying high-grade vintage in volume. Then the lower grade would probably revalue higher because the top moved up. This is an unknown. So at this point, it seems good, but in the future, it might become something we point back to as the beginning of a negative that we currently do not see. My buddy Tony says, this was a fun exercise. I was trying to follow the rules and only pick one. I ended up sharing 3. My top 10 would include some other cards you mentioned, including the Hank Aaron rookie. Joe Jackson's Cracker Jack would be on the list as well. My answer or opinion to this week's question is the following. I don't think that Jordan Kobe result affects the majority of collectors. I do think it affects high-end collectors, especially high-end basketball collectors. I did feel like there was a shark feeding frenzy on some iconic cards in that Heritage event. That signed 52 Mantle going for over $1 million was something that kind of flew under the radar. Not sure if this is a bubble or a sign of the future. I also don't believe that the Kobe Jordan is a legit comp. I believe it was shilled to the number it got. I still think it would have broken the record for the highest sale of a modern basketball card by topping out at around $7 million, if not for the publicity stunt pulled by the syndicate. This next one says, to answer this week's question, I don't think it really matters in the hobby to the true collectors. It caught headlines, but considering that it's a true one-of-a-kind, plus it was bought by a group of rich people investing into the purchase, I don't see it affecting what people do within their own hobby spending. And finally, my dad rounds it out with this. $13 million for a card, any card, but one that was recently produced, is insane. Manufactured rarity is not the same as low survival rarity. Sadly, Kobe's early demise has added to that, but people spending big cash for such a simple card that they printed one of, a few of, and getting 2 stars towards signing it is, in my honest opinion, obscene. All right, so my dad definitely not hiding his opinion there at the end. A lot of people are saying something that I think we absolutely have to acknowledge is, let's be honest, this doesn't really affect most of us. I was driving on the way home yesterday, and I saw Lamborghini. And, you know, a Lamborghini is what, like a $350,000 car? I mean, this thing it looked like a spaceship. Lamborghini sales don't really affect people like me. If the price of a Lamborghini goes up, if it goes down, if they go out of business, it just doesn't matter to me because I'm in a completely different world than the people who are in the Lamborghini market. And I think that the same could be said about a card like this. It doesn't really affect most collectors because most collectors aren't buying even $1,000 cards. It's like most people that golf don't break 100. You know, there are a lot of people who golf. But of the people who actually count their strokes, play by the rules, putt everything out, most people don't break 100. Well, most people aren't involved in the stratosphere or anywhere near it of cards that sell for $12.9 million. So it's just not really an issue. Most people who collect buy cards in the $20 to $100 range. That's why a card like Burbank Sports Cards that has hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cards in their database, and they've got boxes and boxes and boxes of cards that people go through, is so popular because you can go in there and get some cards of your favorite player and not spend more than $30. And for a lot of people, that's fun. For most people, that's how they collect. And there are times where when we're watching YouTube and we see people showing, you know, these expensive cards that they've picked up, or they're at a card show and they're showing off these amazing cards that they see. And you go, well, that's amazing, but like, that's not the sandbox in which I build my castles. I build castles in that other sandbox over there. The little one, the behind the tree there's another sandbox over there. That's where most of us hang out. We don't hang out in the Taj Mahal castle, right? And the Taj Mahal sandbox. That's just not where we are. So you could absolutely make the argument that this just doesn't really affect the overwhelming majority of people in the hobby. Just like when a 52 Mantle and a PSA 10 sells, that doesn't affect me at all. I mean, at all. It doesn't matter what it sells for. If it sells for 100,000 or 100 million, my life is not going to change, and it's probably not going to change the hobby for me. And I think probably most of the truth falls in that area where a card like this is not really a card we need to put too much thought into, because it's just like a completely separate thing than the hobby that most of us participate. Another thing that was said in there is my buddy Tony, Southern Collector 14, said that he's not even sure how legitimate the comp is. You know, part of what made this card catch so much attention is the fact that this card broke the record for the most expensive card ever. So because it broke the record for the most expensive card ever, that's a lot of the reason that it made it onto ESPN and Kevin O'Leary was on the news circuit talking about it. If it had sold for $9 million, then that card would not have gotten as much attention. But highest sale card ever. I had a guy at work come up to me and go, "Oh man, did you hear about that Grail sports card that sold for $12.9 million? Wow, what an amazing card that it's like the perfect card." And I go, a lot of people in the hobby kind of think that maybe that was a little bit of a publicity stunt. Sort of like when the Skeens patch card, the debut patch card of Skeens sold, and you're like, whoa, that sold for a lot of money. And then you come to find out it sold to Dick's Sporting Goods, which they're based in Pennsylvania or Pittsburgh, right? And then it's on display for people to come. It's like a tourist attraction. They absolutely got their money back, not from the card, but from the publicity of Dick's Sporting Goods bought it. Dick's Sporting Goods bought it over and over and over. That in itself made it a smart purchase, because they would have had to spend that much money or more in commercials to hear Dick's Sporting Goods in the public eye for as long as it was as a result of that sales. The fact that I know that Dick's Sporting Goods bought that card is evidence of the fact that it worked. And here I am talking about it again, giving them more publicity for that purchase. That is an ongoing thing, and they've absolutely done well as a result of it. There's got to be a certain amount of the price that was baked into that card where they wanted it to just eclipse the highest ever, to allow them to then have bought the most expensive card ever, to then make it news, to then get all the publicity that it got. And I think that Tony makes a really interesting point. And there are a lot of people who think that there is a little bit questionable that it sold for the amount that it sold for, which is just above the previous highest price ever. I think everybody made some great points. Again, I'm not like a hobby news. This is not a hobby news channel. This is a collector channel where I like to talk more about the why than the what. I am always very, very interested. And if you look at the content that I do, 90% of the time, it's about what I'm thinking about in the hobby, what strategies I'm taking, me asking you all what's going on in your minds. How are you planning out your next series of steps? I am all about the why. Why are you collecting what you collect? Why are you selling those cards and moving into those cards? Why do you think that that's an opportunity instead of that? To me, it's all about the why. I love that thinking through and sharing what you think and why you think it. I just love that kind of stuff. I love strategy. I love thought processes. I love hearing what other people are thinking and why they're thinking it. Now, a couple of things I want to point out. First, this Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern and 8 a.m. Pacific, I will be hosting Hobby Hotline, my first appearance on Hobby Hotline ever, and it's over on the For Collectors channel. And the panel is going to be fantastic. It's going to be Dr. Beckett from the Beckett Monthly magazine. It's going to be Mike Junk Wax Hero, and it's going to be Adam Splendid Sports. It's going to be live streamed, not on this channel, over on the For Collectors channel. I hope that you all consider joining in on that and participating in the chat. And anybody who's ever watched Hobby Hotline knows that the chat is a big driver of what the discussion is for the panel that day. And being able to host that panel and kind of, navigate through the chat and navigate through the conversation is going to be very fun. So I hope that you all consider tuning in for that. But my question for all of you for this upcoming week is as follows. What's a card or set outside of your normal collecting genre that you've enjoyed collecting? Now, you all know that I've been building this pirate set, which I recently completed, of these 1888 Allen and Ginter cards. You all know that I did a video on Friday where I talked about how my buddy, Mookie Chilson thinks outside the box all the time. And he has targeted pinhole cards because of the story that they tell by having pinholes. He has gotten into the 53 Bowman color cards where people filled in the stats on the blank cells on the back. Those are kind of outside the box types of collecting. I even on Friday shared my recent pickup of my N76 Thomas Edison card, which I'm really excited to own, which is outside of my normal genre. So pirate cards outside of my normal genre, Thomas Edison cards outside of my normal genre, cards with writing on them and pinholes are outside of sort of the normal genre of most collectors. And there are a lot of fun, different rabbit holes that are out there. So my question to all of you is, what is an area that you have been participating that is outside of the normal genre, quote unquote normal, what is normal, but outside of what the average collector is doing that you've had fun with? Or what's an area that you're thinking about going into that is outside of your normal? Maybe you've always been a baseball card collector and you're thinking about getting into a different sport. Maybe you're thinking about getting into a non-sport. Maybe you're thinking into something outside the box. But what's the thing that's outside of your box that you are currently considering participating in or are participating in that's been fun? Because there's not a right way to collect. There's not a wrong way to collect. There are just different ways to collect. So I guess the question is, what is an area that you've been collecting or are starting to think about collecting that is outside of normal for your normal? I look forward to hearing those and sharing those next week. I think thinking outside the box and collecting outside the box is a fun way to be a participant in the hobby. And talking about those next week, I think could be a fantastic brainstorming session for a lot of us who are looking for new ways to get excited about something within the hobby space.